There's a certain kind of person who walks into a room and says nothing. They don't smile, they don't frown, they simply look, and the room shifts. People notice them, even if they pretend not to. Their silence isn't passive. It lingers, it stings, it unsettles. Because in a world obsessed with noise, opinion, and constant validation, what could be more unnerving than someone who doesn't try to explain themselves? We like to believe we fear what's loud, the screaming boss, the angry protester, the crashing storm. But the truth is, deep down, what we fear the most is the one who says nothing, the one whose stillness feels like judgment, the one whose quiet presence feels more confrontational than any shouted insult. Imagine this, a boardroom filled with chatter, opinions flying around like debris in a storm. In the corner sits someone who hasn't said a word. They're watching. Not nervously, not awkwardly, but with complete unapologetic stillness, as if they already know how this ends. One by one, people begin to shrink in their speech. They start second-guessing themselves. Because when someone is utterly silent, we begin to hear the sound of our own doubt. This fear isn't new. It's ancient. Evolution has conditioned us to read social cues, tone, expression, movement. Silence strips all of that away. It forces us to interpret. And when we interpret without clarity, we project. We don't fear the silent person because we know they're dangerous. We fear them because we don't know if they are. This is the paradox. Silence invites fear because it denies predictability. And the human mind, restless, insecure, and always scanning for threat, cannot stand unpredictability. But it goes deeper than psychology, because silence, when wielded by a certain kind of person, stops being passive. It becomes a statement, a mirror, a test. Enter Friedrich Nietzsche. He spoke of the noble individual, the one who rises above the herd, beyond the good and evil dictated by society, the one who, in his silence, refuses to justify himself to the morality of the masses. To Nietzsche, silence wasn't weakness, it was restraint. It was the hallmark of someone who doesn't need to shout because they've already conquered the internal war. In a world built on appearances, such silence is power. It hints at depth, it suggests agency, and it demands nothing from you because it already has everything it needs. The silent one doesn't try to impress you, and that makes them terrifying, because if someone isn't trying to impress, what else are they capable of? This section is not just about people who are quiet. It's not about shyness or social awkwardness. It's about a specific kind of silence, a weaponized stillness, the kind that holds tension like a loaded gun, even when no words are spoken. We've seen this in characters across stories, mythologies, and history. The silent monk, the calm assassin, the watchful general, the lone wolf. These figures haunt us not because of what they say, but because of what they refuse to say. And so we must ask, what gives such silence its power? Is it our projection, our fear of the unknown? Or is it something more, something ancient and primal that still lives in our bones? In the chapters ahead, we'll explore the roots of this fear. We'll dive into Nietzsche's warnings about conformity and the masks of morality. We'll explore how silence becomes a form of psychological warfare. How history's most powerful individuals cloak their power, not in loud declarations, but in enigmatic restraint. And we'll ask the question few dare to. What does it mean to become the silent one? Because in a world where everyone is speaking, shouting, performing, those who are truly free are often the ones who say nothing at all. This is the silence that unnerves us, and perhaps it's the silence that sets them free. Power, in its purest form, doesn't shout. It doesn't seek applause, and it rarely explains itself. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this, not just as a philosopher, but as an observer of human nature, one who dared to look beneath the surface of morality, ambition, and self-deception. He saw a world not divided into good and evil, but between two types of people. Those who conform and those who transcend. At the center of Nietzsche's thought lies a powerful figure, one both admired and feared, the Übermensch. Often misunderstood, this overman was not a tyrant or a brute. He was not loud, he was not theatrical. He was someone who had mastered the self, who no longer needed the validation of others because he had built his own values. He had become the author of his own meaning, and such a person often has little to say, because when you're no longer seeking permission to exist, there is no need to persuade. When you're no longer playing society's game, there is no need to perform. In Nietzsche's eyes, the loud ones, the moralizers, the preachers, the idealists were still caught in the trap of needing to be heard. But the truly powerful individual, he had already transcended that trap. This brings us to the concept of the will to power, one of Nietzsche's most misunderstood ideas. It wasn't about dominating others, it was about the internal force that compels life to grow, to evolve, to overcome. The will to power is not about control over the external world, it's about mastery over the inner world, and master is quiet. Imagine a room full of people trying to prove themselves. Their language is loud, their gestures are exaggerated, their posture screams, "Notice me, believe me, follow me." But in the corner again is the one who does none of that. He listens, he waits, he speaks only when it's absolutely necessary. And when he does, everyone stops, because true power doesn't beg for attention. It commands it. This is the shadow of power that Nietzsche warned us about. The idea that genuine strength often goes unnoticed by the crowd, precisely because the crowd has been conditioned to worship its opposite. We associate power with visibility. We assume that the person on stage, the one trending, the one speaking the most, must be the most powerful. But Nietzsche flips that entirely. To him, the loudness of a person often reveals their lack of inner power. Their noise is compensation. Their certainty is a shield. Their morality is borrowed. In contrast, the powerful individual does not need to convince others of his worth. He acts. He becomes. His presence, like gravity, does not need to be advertised. It simply pulls. This can be seen not just in theory, but in the real world. Look at many of the most powerful CEOs, the most influential people in rooms full of experts. They often speak less than everyone else, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've already made the most important decision to only speak when it matters. Steve Jobs once said, "Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things." But what he didn't say is that power often lies in what you don't reveal, in what you don't chase, in what you don't say. There's a reason people lean in when someone pauses before speaking. It's because silence in someone with authority feels like control. It creates tension. And in that tension, others begin to move, guessing, calculating, second-guessing. The silent one already holds the higher ground. The Stoic Emperor Marcus Aurelius understood this long before Nietzsche. He ruled one of the most powerful empires in history, and yet his private writings, meditations, are filled not with conquest, but with reminders to stay humble, to observe, and to control oneself. He once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." This is Nietzsche's Übermensch, centuries before the term existed. The man who doesn't explain himself, because his actions already speak. In today's world, we are trained to believe that power must be performed, that you must show your followers, your hustle, your dominance. But what if this performance is itself the sign of insecurity? What if the real power is in the restraint? Nietzsche didn't see silence as passive. He saw it as strategic, a mark of the one who has transcended the need for approval, the one who has mastered the art of timing, the one who knows that not reacting is often more powerful than any reaction. He also explored the tension between two kinds of morality, master morality and slave morality. Master morality, according to Nietzsche, comes from the strong. It is built from within. It values strength, courage, independence. It does not seek to explain itself because it is rooted in self-created values. Slave morality, on the other hand, comes from the weak. It is reactive. It moralizes the actions of others. It labels the strong as evil and the obedient as good. It seeks validation because it lacks internal grounding, and slave morality talks a lot. It needs to justify, to signal, to point fingers, to prove that it is right. But master morality is silent. It doesn't ask for your agreement. It moves on, with or without you. This is why the silent one is feared. Not because they say they're better, but because they act as if they don't need anyone's permission to be. In this way, Nietzsche's vision is not just philosophical, it's deeply psychological. Because the one who no longer plays society's moral games, who no longer performs, for its approval reveals a terrifying truth to the rest of us. You don't have to play either, and that's threatening, because if they're free from the rules, what does that say about the rules themselves? This is the shadow of power, not domination, not cruelty, but independence. The kind of independence that says, I will not explain myself to a world that hasn't earned the right to understand me. And so the silent ones become dangerous, not because they intend harm, but because they are beyond the reach of manipulation. They cannot be baited, they cannot be guilted, they cannot be flattered. They simply exist on their own terms. And that is what Nietzsche feared and admired the most. Because in a world that lives through performance, those who stop performing become gods among men. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is the most loaded form of it. In a conversation, silence feels like static in the mind. We rush to fill it. We wonder what it means. We ask ourselves, did I say something wrong? Are they judging me? Do they know something I don't? We're not reacting to what was said. We're reacting to what wasn't. And that is where true psychological power begins. To understand why silence can feel so overwhelming, we have to go back. Not just to childhood or culture, but to evolution. Because the human brain is not wired for peace of mind. It's wired for survival. And for most of history, silence in a social context often meant danger, a quiet predator, an unreadable rival, a sudden withdrawal from the tribe. Silence in nature rarely meant safety. It meant uncertainty, and uncertainty to our primitive ancestors was a threat. This hardwiring didn't disappear. It evolved. It now lives in our interactions, in our meetings, in our relationships. It is the subtle discomfort we feel when someone gives us nothing to work with. No facial expression, no verbal feedback, just stillness. Psychologically, we are built to fill that void. This is the ambiguity effect, a cognitive bias where people avoid options with unknown probabilities. When we don't know what someone is thinking, we instinctively assume the worst. This taps into another psychological pattern, the negativity bias. Our minds are more sensitive to threats than rewards. So when someone remains silent, we don't imagine kindness or neutrality. We imagine judgment, rejection, or conflict. Silence becomes a mirror, and that mirror doesn't reflect the silent person. It reflects the observer's own fears, insecurities, and assumptions. This is why the quiet one in a room often feels the most powerful. Not because they've done anything, but because everyone else has projected power onto them. This is the psychological trick of mystery. Mystery is magnetic. Not because it is inherently attractive, but because it allows others to fantasize, to guess, to build a story around the unknown. And stories are always more powerful than facts. Think of the last time you met someone who said very little but listened intently. You probably assumed they were intelligent, maybe even intimidating. You couldn't read them, and in the vacuum of information, your mind raced to make sense of them. You filled in the blanks with your own projections. This is how silence becomes psychological warfare, because it doesn't just withhold information. It shifts the burden of meaning onto others. It forces them to work harder, to decode, to interpret, to worry. The one who is silent suddenly becomes the one with control, not over others directly, but over the narrative others build around him. And that narrative, if guided skillfully, becomes a weapon. This is where Machiavellianism enters. Niccolo Machiavelli, the Renaissance thinker often associated with manipulation and political cunning, understood that information is leverage. The more you speak, the more you reveal. The more you reveal, the more predictable you become. But when you remain silent, others begin to reveal themselves instead. Machiavellianism, as a psychological trait, includes strategic thinking, manipulation, emotional detachment, and the careful control of information. And silence, calculated silence, is the most effective tool in this arsenal. Because to speak is to limit, but to be silent is to become anything. A silent person is a blank page, and in every social session, the crowd will write the story for them. Some will write fear, others will write fascination, but all will contribute to the illusion of depth. This illusion is critical, because power is often a matter of perception, and silence amplifies perception. It becomes a fog in which people Get lost. Studies in social psychology have shown that people perceive those who speak less as being more intelligent, more competent, and even more attractive. This isn't because they are, it's because they offer fewer opportunities to be disproven. Their mystery protects them from criticism, while their stillness encourages speculation. In a famous study on the observer effect, researchers found that simply being watched, or believing one is being watched, changes behavior. Silence mimics this effect. A silent observer in a room creates tension. Others modify their behavior, self-censor, become more guarded. The silent one hasn't done anything, but by doing nothing, they've shifted the entire dynamic. They've turned presence into power. But there's a darker side to this, because silence doesn't always come from peace. It can come from strategy, from calculation, from the cold understanding that people will tell you who they are if you give them the space. Interrogators use this tactic. After asking a question, they stay silent, uncomfortably silent. The subject, unable to bear the tension, begins to talk. They offer more than they were asked. They expose themselves, and so it is in everyday life. The one who talks the least listens the most, and the one who listens the most holds the keys to influence. Because influence isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the one everyone is reacting to, even if they don't realize it. This is why the silent one is feared. Not because they have threatened anyone, but because the very stillness becomes a canvas for others' chaos. In high-stakes negotiations, elite interrogations, and intelligence operations, the most dangerous tactic is often the simplest. Say less, reveal less, wait, and let the others show their hand. This is not passivity, it's warfare. Psychological warfare dressed in restraint. Because when the world demands noise, silence becomes disruptive. When people expect a reaction, withholding one becomes a form of dominance. When everyone is performing, the one who doesn't becomes the judge. And when everyone is speaking from insecurity, the one who speaks from nothing becomes godlike. This is the paradox. We fear what we cannot predict. We distrust what we cannot label. And we obey what we cannot understand. And so, in a world obsessed with explanation, exposure, and endless communication, those who master the art of saying nothing, of revealing nothing, of simply being, become more powerful than any title, status, or weapon could ever make them. Because their silence is not emptiness, it is the edge of the blade. Power has always been linked to the ability to shape perception. But what if power isn't about what is said at all? What if it's about what isn't said? What if the most influential figures in history weren't those who shouted the loudest, but those who whispered the least? Throughout history, silence has been as potent as any sword, as strategic as any battle plan. Power, as we've learned, isn't about constantly projecting dominance, it's about controlling the narrative, and silence has always been the perfect tool to do that. Take Niccolo Machiavelli, for instance, the Renaissance philosopher and politician who changed the way we think about power. Machiavelli didn't write plainly. His treatises were dense, riddled with metaphors, layered with ambiguity. In his seminal work, The Prince, he never said, "This is how you should rule." Instead, he wove a tapestry of allegories, indirect advice, and strategic silence. To the untrained eye, his work appeared as a collection of riddles, a code. But to those in power, it was clear. Silence is a tool of governance. His very silence in his writings, his refusal to be overt, mirrored the political subtleties he recommended. Machiavelli's silence wasn't passive. It was a calculated act of control. He wasn't just telling rulers what to do, he was showing them how to wield silence to their advantage. Because when you speak less, you expose less. The more you speak, the more you risk revealing your true intentions. But silence leaves everything open to interpretation. Then there is Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor of Rome. As ruler, Aurelius is remembered for his disciplined nature, his restrained words, and his focus on inner peace. In his meditations, he rarely spoke of his personal triumphs. Instead, he focused on self-mastery, the art of controlling one's emotions, and the strength that comes from silence. While other emperors commanded armies and raised armies, Aurelius commanded the self. His words were sparse, his actions deliberate, but this silence wasn't about retreating from power. It was about refining it. Marcus Aurelius understood that true power lies not in boastful proclamations or in the noise of public display, but in the quiet ability to remain unshaken. In a world of constant warfare and turmoil, he chose silence as his weapon, not as a retreat from power, but as an assertion of it. The same principle applies to Thomas Shelby, the fictional anti-hero from the acclaimed show Peaky Blinders. He is the embodiment of silent dominance. In the show, Tommy Shelby speaks less than most. He doesn't need to say much. What he does is precise and calculated. He is a man who speaks only when necessary, using his quiet demeanor to command not just fear, but respect. People listen when Tommy speaks, not because of the volume of his voice, but because of the weight behind his words. His silence in the world of Peaky Blinders is a shield and a sword. It draws people in, makes them second guess, and often leaves them too fearful to challenge him. His power doesn't come from flashy speeches or constant displays of strength. It comes from his ability to remain an enigma. When people can't read you, they can't predict you, and that makes you dangerous. In organized crime, silence takes on an even more chilling role. The mafia's code of silence, known as omerta, has long been considered the backbone of the underworld. Omerta isn't just about keeping secrets, it's about controlling the flow of information. Those who observe the code aren't just avoiding talk, they're wielding silence as a weapon of power and protection. They understand that information is currency, and by withholding it, they hold the upper hand. The unspoken rule is that silence ensures loyalty and survival. Talk too much, and you risk your life. Say nothing, and you ensure your dominance in the shadows. Compare this to the loud theatrical figures of history. Demagogues and dictators, for example, often gain power by creating noise. They fill the public sphere with speech, spectacle, and demands for attention. This loudness attracts the masses, but it also creates vulnerabilities. Noise breeds scrutiny. It makes the speaker predictable. In contrast, silence generates mystery, and mystery breeds fear. Consider the difference between the likes of Julius Caesar, whose speeches and acts of dominance were broadcast across the empire, and Augustus, his successor, who was far quieter in his approach. Augustus understood that silence was more powerful than grand gestures. By remaining reserved and enigmatic, he was able to consolidate power without attracting the kind of attention that could invite rebellion. His quiet reign, in many ways, was the foundation of the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace that lasted for centuries. The world of politics and leadership is full of examples where those who stayed silent commanded more respect than those who bellowed. Silence can be the shield that protects leaders from the ever-watchful eyes of their adversaries. It forces others to project onto them to create stories and narratives that are often more flattering or terrifying than reality. But silence also breeds suspicion. People fear what they can't read, what they can't predict. This is why the silent figure becomes the source of so much speculation. What are they thinking? What are they planning? It's the very unknown that makes silence so effective. When you speak, you expose yourself. When you remain silent, you become a blank slate, a canvas upon which others project their greatest fears or their greatest aspirations. In today's political climate, we see the echoes of these historical figures. Leaders who speak too much often expose their weaknesses, but those who speak less, the ones who understand the power of silence, become forces to be reckoned with. Whether it's a CEO who knows when to stay quiet in a room full of chatter, or a politician who lets their actions speak louder than their words, silence continues to be a tool of influence and control. The lesson of history is clear. Silence is not weakness. It is the foundation of power. The less you say, the more others say about you. The more they fill in the gaps, the more they create a narrative that serves you. This historical pattern of power through silence remains relevant today. The less you reveal, the more you control. And in the silence, you're free to shape the perception of others as they scramble to understand you. Silence is power's quietest ally, working in the shadows, influencing and commanding without the need for loud speeches or public displays. We live in a world where silence is increasingly rare and increasingly dangerous. In the age of 24, there is 24/7 news cycles, social media, and endless noise. The absence of a voice stands out in a way it never has before. The modern world is built on the constant flow of information, opinions, and judgments. Silence is no longer seen as a strategic choice or a sign of power. It is often interpreted as a threat. In a society where everyone is encouraged to speak, share, and display their lives, those who withhold become anomalies, figures to be feared, scrutinized, and judged. The irony is striking. In an era obsessed with transparency, those who remain private are perceived as enigmatic, even dangerous. Silence is the ultimate rebellion in a world that demands the constant projection of identity. The more one withholds, the more their absence is interpreted. Silence is no longer neutral. It is seen as a form of resistance. But why is this the case? Why does the absence of words, the refusal to participate, carry so much weight? In a world where every action is logged, analyzed, and shared, those who choose not to speak, whether in the form of social media posts, public opinions, or even personal relationships, are often seen as suspicious. We have become so accustomed to the constant stream of data that when someone refuses to engage, they are labeled as hiding something. The very choice to remain silent is now misinterpreted as guilt, apathy, or defiance. The reality is that silence, in this digital age, has become the last refugee for those who seek to control the narrative. Social media algorithms reward the loudest voices, the most visible actions. The more someone posts, comments, or broadcasts, the more they are seen. The more their opinions are amplified. In this landscape, silence is an act of defiance. It is a rejection of the digital norm. But this rejection comes at a cost. Those who refuse to participate in the noise are punished with suspicion. This shift in perception is a direct result of the way media has evolved over the last few decades. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook have commodified attention. The more you speak, the more visible you become, and the more your influence grows. But this influence is built on a foundation of noise. The louder the opinion, the greater the reach. The more you share, the more you are seen. It is a world where visibility has become synonymous with credibility, and silence is the enemy of influence. We see this dynamic play out every day in the media. Political figures, celebrities, and influencers who stay quiet are often presumed to be out of touch, disconnected, or even hiding something. They become the subject of speculation, their silence interpreted as a sign of guilt or powerlessness. But in truth, they are simply refusing to feed the machine. They are opting out of the ceaseless noise. And in doing so, they are making a statement about power in the modern world. Take, for example, the rise of public figures who are relentlessly scrutinized not for their policies or actions, but for the very act of remaining silent. In the age of digital visibility, it seems that the loudest voices are the only ones that count. But what happens when someone decides to step away from the constant barrage of public opinion? When a public figure goes quiet, when they choose to withdraw from the noise, they are no longer seen as a source of power. They become a source of suspicion. Silence becomes synonymous with threat, with mystery, with something more ominous than the loudest of statements. This obsession with visibility, this addiction to the constant flow of information, has redefined what it means to have power. Today, those who speak the most, those who shout the loudest, are the ones who are seen as powerful. But this is a distortion of the truth. True power, as we have seen throughout history, is not about speaking. It's about controlling the flow of information. It is about the ability to remain silent when everyone else is speaking. It is about withholding the most precious thing in the digital world, your attention. And when you withhold it, others are forced to fill the void with their own projections. In this context, the silent ones, those who choose not to participate in the constant noise of the digital age, become more powerful than they appear. They are the ones who remain in control. By choosing silence, they refuse to allow the world to dictate their narrative. They become the ultimate outliers, the ones who refuse to be scanned, categorized, or predicted. And this refusal to engage with the world on its terms makes them more dangerous than any vocal critic could ever be. But the world doesn't like outliers. It doesn't like people who resist the system. The world wants conformity. It wants noise. It wants participation. And so those who remain silent are forced to bear the weight of suspicion. Their silence is misinterpreted, twisted, and used. against them. It becomes a symbol of everything the world fears: unpredictability, secrecy, and power. The media and social platforms thrive on the amplification of voices, on the constant churn of content and opinion. But in this landscape, silence becomes an act of resistance, a refusal to be part of the endless cycle of self-promotion and public validation. The more one remains silent, the more their power grows. Because, as we know, silence cannot be easily controlled. It leaves too much room for interpretation. In the digital age, power is no longer about loud proclamations or grand gestures. It is about choosing when to speak and when to remain silent. It is about controlling what others see and hear. It is about crafting a narrative in a world that rewards noise by withholding it. The more the world demands transparency, the more silence becomes a weapon. The more the world demands participation, the more silence becomes a rebellion. And the more the world values noise, the more silence becomes the ultimate power. Silence has always been a paradox. It can be the mark of wisdom, of inner peace, of someone who has transcended the noise of the world. But it can also be the sign of something much darker, a sign of cold, calculating detachment, of someone who is withholding their true intentions until the moment is right. Silence, in its most controlled and deliberate form, walks a tightrope between the noble and the sinister. It can be the presence of a sage or the absence of a psychopath. It is both powerful and unsettling, and this duality has captured our imagination for centuries. Consider the Stoics, the ancient philosophers who embraced silence as a tool of self-control. Men like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus understood that in a world filled with noise, restraint was the key to clarity and power. Their silence was not a retreat from the world, but an engagement with it on a deeper, more meaningful level. The Stoics believed that by limiting their words and controlling their emotions, they could achieve a state of inner peace and wisdom. Their silence was a reflection of their strength, a strength that did not need to announce itself to the world. Yet as we move through history, silence begins to take on a more complex, even dangerous connotation. It becomes the domain of those who, rather than seeking peace, are wielding power. Walter White, the high school chemistry teacher turned drug kingpin, is a modern example of the silent archetype. As his transformation unfolds in Breaking Bad, we watch as he becomes more and more a man of few words. And those words, when spoken, are carefully chosen, chilling in their precision. His silence reflects his control. It is a silence that hides a mind operating at the intersection of calculation and manipulation. As his silence deepens, his power grows. Walter White's quietude becomes a weapon. His every word, his every move, designed to strike with lethal force. Then there is Anton Chigurh, the relentless hitman in No Country for Old Men. A man of almost no speech, Chigurh's silence is not the contemplative stillness of the Stoics, but a cold, impenetrable wall. He does not speak because he does not need to. His silence is predatory. It is the silence of a hunter, one who observes, assesses, and strikes without warning. In the world of Chigurh, words are unnecessary because actions speak louder than anything he could say. His silence is not passive. It is a silence that demands attention, that commands fear. When he finally speaks, his words are few, but they carry the weight of a man who has no need for more. His silence is the embodiment of pure, terrifying control. The silent archetype also emerges in characters like Tyler Durden, the anarchist figure from Fight Club. Tyler speaks little, but when he does, his words resonate with a power that defies logic. He is a man of action, not words. And in his silence, he becomes the embodiment of rebellion against societal norms. He teaches the protagonist and us that silence is not the absence of communication, but a refusal to conform to the expectations of the world. Tyler's silence is not about restraint. It is about embracing chaos. His power lies in his ability to stay silent when others are speaking, to withhold his thoughts and intentions, and to let others project their desires onto him. In the world of Tyler Durden, silence is a means of creating influence without ever revealing your true self. And then there is Hannibal Lecter, perhaps the most chilling of all the silent archetypes. The character of Lecter, as portrayed in The Silence of the Lambs and beyond, is the epitome of controlled, strategic silence. Lecter's silence is a tool of manipulation. He speaks only when necessary, and each word is carefully measured, almost as if he is choosing to play with his victims' minds. His silence gives him a terrifying air of mystery, and in that mystery he finds power. Hannibal Lecter is not only a master of psychological control, but a master of silence. His silence makes him unreadable, unpredictable, and dangerous like all the characters we've mentioned. His silence is not an absence, it is an active force, one that shapes the way we perceive him and his power. These characters are not just creations of fiction, they are reflections of something deeply embedded in our collective psyche. They represent the silent archetype, figures whose power lies not in what they say, but in what they choose not to say. The silent archetype is both fascinating and terrifying. It is the mark of someone who operates in a world beyond words, who understands that true power is not about loud proclamations, but about controlling the flow of information. Silence, when wielded with intent, becomes a weapon, a form of dominance that is subtle, yet all the more powerful for it. But what makes these silent figures so compelling? Why are we both drawn to them and disturbed by them in equal measure? Perhaps it is because they embody a power that we can never fully understand. A power that is not bound by the limitations of language or societal expectations. They are the ultimate outliers operating outside the bounds of convention and norm. And in their silence, they are free. Free from the need to explain themselves. Free from the constraints of social interaction. Free from the need to conform. The silent archetype speaks to something deep within us. The desire for autonomy, for agency, for control. These characters remind us of the power that silence can hold, but they also remind us of the danger inherent in that power. Silence, when used in the right way, can be a force for good, a tool for wisdom, self-control, and reflection. But in the hands of those with darker intentions, silence can be used as a weapon to manipulate, to deceive, and to dominate. The silent ones are the ones who hold the power, because they know the truth that others do not. Sometimes, the less you say, the more power you have. These figures are a reminder that silence is not an absence, but a presence, a powerful force in its own right. Whether it is the stoic restraint of Marcus Aurelius or the cold, predatory silence of Hannibal. Lecter, the silent archetype, teaches us that true power is often found not in the loudness of our words, but in the stillness of our silence. And perhaps in a world filled with noise, that silence is the most dangerous power of all. In the final act of our exploration, we return to Friedrich Nietzsche, who, at the heart of his philosophy, offers us an unsettling idea. What if the silence we so often fear is not a sign of moral failing, but a profound expression of power, one that defies our traditional understanding of good and evil? The Übermensch, or Overman, stands as a central figure in Nietzsche's thought, yet he is not a hero of loud proclamations or grand gestures. Rather, the Übermensch embodies something far subtler, something far more terrifying, the kind of power that does not need to announce itself. Silence in Nietzsche's world is the mark of the truly powerful, the ones who have transcended conventional morality. They are the individuals who refuse to be labeled as good or evil. They do not conform to the social scripts written by the herd. Instead, they create their own values. They act decisively, silently, and with purpose, unmoved by the judgments or expectations of those around them. This departure from traditional morality is both liberating and terrifying. In a society built on shared norms, where people are expected to align themselves with the values of the group, the silent individual's refusal to participate in these shared narratives shakes the very foundation of what we consider to be right. When someone chooses to remain silent, they step outside the prescribed roles and behaviors we've come to expect from others. They no longer need to justify themselves in the language of the masses. This act of silence is not an absence of expression. It is a statement of freedom, a rejection of the herd's demand for conformity. But this is where Nietzsche's final warning comes into play. To the average person, this silence may appear as a kind of apathy or indifference. It's the absence of the self-assurance we often associate with moral righteousness. But in reality, it is something much more profound. The silent individual is not apathetic. They are not indifferent. They are simply beyond the duality of good and evil, beyond the need for validation or approval. They operate according to their own will, their own values, without needing to explain them to anyone. To modern sensibilities, this kind of person can be deeply unsettling. How can we trust someone who does not conform to the rules, someone who doesn't participate in the expected rituals of self-expression? And yet, it is precisely this refusal to participate in the moral conventions of society that makes them dangerous. They cannot be controlled, they cannot be predicted, and they cannot be easily understood. In a world built on the concept of the other, they are the most terrifying kind of anomaly. The person who has transcended the binary thinking of good and evil, who stands apart from the herd not out of arrogance, but out of a profound inner mastery. The question then is whether silence, this refusal to engage in the conventional moralities of the world, is an act of rebellion or an act of supreme self-mastery. Is it an expression of indifference to the suffering of others? Or is it the clearest sign of an individual who has reached the highest level of personal freedom, who answers only to themselves and their own values? We live in an age where everything is scrutinized. Every action, every word, every gesture is interpreted, analyzed, and categorized. People are expected to fall in line with shared norms, to be open, to speak their minds, to express their true selves. To remain silent, to refuse to reveal oneself to the public eye, is to defy the very foundation of modern society. It is an act that places the silent person in opposition to the world around him. The herd demands transparency, it demands visibility. But the Übermensch, whether consciously or not, refuses to comply with this demand. In the chaos of modern life, where the noise is deafening and the pressure to conform is constant, silence becomes not an absence of words, but a refusal to surrender control. Nietzsche's challenge to us is clear. When we look at the silent ones, those who do not speak, those who do not engage in the daily performance of life, are we right to see them as apathetic or indifferent? Or are we in fact witnessing a profound form of strength, one that we cannot fully understand because it transcends our most basic moral assumptions? The more we try to categorize and label silence, whether as indifference, guilt, or apathy, the further we move away from understanding its true power. Nietzsche's final warning is that in a world that is constantly searching for meaning and certainty, silence can be a dangerous and powerful force. It is a force that doesn't need to announce its presence. It doesn't need to be understood. It simply is. And perhaps that is exactly what makes it so terrifying. As we conclude this journey into silence and its power, we are left with one final haunting question. In a world so dependent on noise, is silence the ultimate act of rebellion, or the clearest form of self-mastery? Perhaps in the silence, we find the truest expression of power. We live in a world addicted to noise. Our lives are filled with constant chatter, the hum of social media, the click of keyboards, the roar of news cycles that never stop spinning. In this world, silence has become a rare and almost forgotten commodity, a luxury for the few. But what if silence, in all its quietude, has become the ultimate signal of power? In a society where visibility is equated with worth, silence becomes the ultimate act of resistance. It is no longer a passive state. To be silent today is to refuse to conform to the demands of a world that expects constant self-promotion, endless justification, and public performance. Those who can walk through this world in silence, unbothered, unprovoked, unreadable, these are the modern enigmas. They unsettle us not because they are inherently dangerous, but because they cannot be known. And that is what makes them terrifying. Consider the CEOs who sit quietly in meetings, letting their words land like rare, precious stones. Their silence commands attention not because it is empty, but because it suggests depth, control, and an unnerving understanding of power dynamics. Or think of the historical figures, the emperors, philosophers, and leaders who through their silence signaled something greater than mere rhetoric ever could. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, wrote volumes on silence and inner discipline, yet he spoke little. He ruled an empire, but his most profound influence came not through speeches, but through actions that spoke louder than any word could. Now, in the modern age, silence is no longer just the absence of sound. It has become a weapon. In a world of endless noise, the silent ones command the most attention. Not because they make noise, but because their silence invites speculation, fear, and projection. What are they thinking? What are they planning? What do they know that we don't? The implications of this are far-reaching. In a world that demands transparency, silence is perceived as a refusal to conform, to reveal oneself, to be cataloged and understood. Those who remain silent refuse to be pawns in a game where the rules are written by those who speak the loudest. And in their refusal, they signal something far more potent than mere apathy. They signal independence. They are not subjects of the noise, they are masters of it. But here lies the haunting realization as we examine the silent ones, whether they are figures of power, historical giants, or even those in our personal lives who remain aloof and enigmatic. What we see is not always what we want to see. Their silence holds a mirror to our own insecurities, to the parts of ourselves that feel inadequate in a world where noise is the marker of success. In a society that rewards constant expression and validation, those who remain silent force us to confront uncomfortable truths. We are not always in control of our thoughts, nor do we always know what to make of our place in the world. The silent ones show us, perhaps unwillingly, how fragile our sense of identity is, how dependent we are on the approval and understanding of others. To be silent is to say, I do not need you to understand me. I do not need you to validate my existence. I am enough as I am. And in this silence there is power. Not the power of loud proclamations, not the power of force or manipulation, but the power of a deeper, more profound mastery over self. It is the power to exist in the world without being defined by it, to hold steady in a sea of noise without ever being moved by the waves. But this is not just a power that exists in the abstract. It is a power that has real-world consequences. In a world dominated by algorithms, social media, and the ever-present expectation to perform for others, the silent ones become the outliers. They refuse to conform to the digital age's constant demand for self-expression, and in doing so, they become symbols of something much larger than themselves. A rebellion against the overwhelming noise, the constant stream of opinions, judgments, and feedback that defines our digital lives. So, as we reach the conclusion of this exploration, we are faced with a question. Are we afraid of the silent ones, the ones who remain aloof and unreadable? Or perhaps more troubling, are we afraid of becoming them? There is an unsettling power in silence, one that can shift the balance of control. Silence forces us to face our own vulnerabilities, our dependence on external validation, and our fear of being unknown. To be silent is to step into a space where others cannot enter, a space where the rules are not set by anyone but the silent individual themselves. It is a space where power is not given, but taken. As we sit in the quiet, we are forced to confront a deeper truth. In a world that thrives on noise, silence is the final frontier of power. The silent ones do not need to explain themselves. They do not need to justify their existence. Their very existence challenges the rules of the game. They stand as a testament to the idea that true power does not come from what you say, but from what you withhold. So the question lingers, are we afraid of the silent ones? Or afraid of becoming one ourselves? In the end, perhaps the greatest fear is not what the silent ones know, but what we do not know about them and what they might reveal about ourselves. And so, we are left with this haunting truth. In a world that never stops talking, the silent ones are the ones who truly speak. We live in a world addicted to noise. Our lives are filled with constant chatter, the hum of social media, the click of keyboards, the roar of news cycles that never stop spinning. In this world, silence has become a rare and almost forgotten commodity, a luxury for the few. But what if silence in all its quietude has become the ultimate signal of power? In a society where visibility is equated with worth, silence becomes the ultimate act of resistance. It is no longer a passive state. To be silent today is to refuse to conform to the demands of a world that expects constant self-promotion, endless justification, and public performance. Those who can walk through this world in silence, unbothered, unprovoked, unreadable, these are the modern enigmas. They unsettle us not because they are inherently dangerous, but because they cannot be known. And that is what makes them terrifying. Consider the CEOs who sit quietly in meetings, letting their words land like rare, precious stones. Their silence commands attention not because it is empty, but because it suggests depth, control, and an unnerving understanding of power dynamics. Or think of the historical figures, the emperors, philosophers, and leaders who through their silence signaled something greater than mere rhetoric ever could. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, wrote volumes on silence and inner discipline, yet he spoke little. He ruled an empire, but his most profound influence came not through speeches, but through actions that spoke louder than any word could. Now, in the modern age, silence is no longer just the absence of sound. It has become a weapon. In a world of endless noise, the silent ones command the most attention. Not because they make noise, but because their silence invites speculation, fear, and projection. What are they thinking? What are they planning? What do they know that we don't? The implications of this are far-reaching. In a world that demands transparency, silence is perceived as the refusal to conform, to reveal oneself, to be cataloged and understood. Those who remain silent refuse to be pawns in a game, where the rules are written by those who speak the loudest, and in their refusal they signal something far more potent than mere apathy. They signal independence. They are not subjects of the noise, they are masters of it. But here lies the haunting realization as we examine the silent ones. Whether they are figures of power, historical giants, or even those in our personal lives who remain aloof and enigmatic, what we see is not always what we want to see. Their silence holds a mirror to our own insecurities, to the parts of ourselves that feel inadequate in a world where noise is the marker of success. In a society that rewards constant expression and validation, those who remain silent force us to confront uncomfortable truths. We are not always in control of our thoughts, nor do we always know what to make of our place in the world. The silent ones show us, perhaps unwillingly, how fragile our sense of identity is, how dependent we are on the approval and understanding of others. To be silent is to say, I do not need you to understand me. I do not need you to validate my existence. I am enough as I am. And in this silence, there is power. Not the power of loud proclamations, not the power of force or manipulation, but the power of a deeper, more profound mastery over self. It is the power to exist in the world without being defined by it, to hold steady in a sea of noise without ever being moved by the waves. But this is not just a power that exists in the abstract. It is a power that has real-world consequences. In a world dominated by algorithms, social media, and the ever-present expectation to perform for others, the silent ones become the outliers. They refuse to conform to the digital age's constant demand for self-expression, and in doing so, they become symbols of something much larger than themselves. A rebellion against the overwhelming noise, the constant stream of opinions, judgments, and feedback that defines our digital lives. So, as we reach the conclusion of this exploration, we are faced with a question. Are we afraid of the silent ones, the ones who remain aloof and unreadable? Or, perhaps more troubling, are we afraid of becoming them? There is an unsettling power in silence, one that can shift the balance of control. Silence forces us to face our own vulnerabilities, our dependence on external validation, and our fear of being unknown. To be silent is to step into a space where others cannot enter, a space where the rules are not set by anyone but the silent individual themselves. It is a space where power is not given, but taken. As we sit in the quiet, we are forced to confront a deeper truth. In a world that thrives on noise, silence is the final frontier of power. The silent ones do not need to explain themselves. They do not need to justify their existence. Their very existence challenges the rules of the game. They stand as a testament to the idea that true power does not come from what you say, but from what you withhold. So the question lingers, are we afraid of the silent ones, or afraid of becoming one ourselves? In the end, perhaps the greatest fear is not what the silent ones know, but what we do not know about them, and what they might reveal about ourselves. And so we are left with this haunting truth. In a world that never stops talking, the silent ones are the ones who truly speak.